I have been in a long-distance relationship with my girlfriend for a couple of years now, and every summer and winter break, I'm able to go travel and see her. This encounter happened about 2 years ago at my girlfriend's house. I should mention that my girlfriend lives on the outskirts of her city in Mexico, where houses are around 200 to 300 yards apart and surrounded by dense woods. Usually, days and nights there go about peacefully, accompanied by the sound of woods and the occasional car passing by from others who live nearby. I had always considered her place to be perfect just to be able to spend time outdoors, until this occasion. Honestly, I don't think I have ever been this scared in my life. This sighting will be carved in my mind forever. On a chilly night of December, I was at my girlfriend's house, and I had planned to spend the night with her since she would have been by herself that day. Her mom was out of town, and she didn't want to stay by herself either. We were having dinner at the kitchen at around 8 p.m. We chatted about activities that we could do tomorrow, tasks her mom asked her to do, how much we missed each other, among others. After about an hour of conversation and laughs, we decided to go into the living room and cuddle on the couch, watching TV. We both got up and put the dishes in the sink. She went into her bedroom, and I went outside to the bathroom. The house layout consisted of a long corridor that connected pretty much every room in the house, and a back door at the end of the corridor, which led to the patio. The patio was open, full of trees, plants, and the only thing separating the patio from the woods was a fence, made up of stones and barbed wire that stood at around 1 meter tall. Halfway down the patio, there was the bathroom, being lit by a single and weak light bulb. So if anybody wanted to go, they had to walk outside, even if it had to be in the middle of the night. I'm not coming here at night, I thought. I remember when I opened the back door and stepped into the patio, a cold breeze stroked my face and sent shivers across my back. So, I hurried to go back as quickly as possible because, to be honest, I was a little spooked going outside in the darkness, knowing that the woods were pretty much a few steps away. I finished doing my business, washed my hands, and started walking back, being careful not to trip on something because the light bulb was almost non-existent. I was about halfway when I heard a noise to my left, like someone stepping on a branch and breaking it. I stopped and quickly turned, trying to see what made the noise, but I could only see a portion of the fence and nothing but darkness beyond that. However, I had this weird feeling that someone or something was watching me, something on the other side of the fence. I stood there in silence for around 30 seconds, listening to the surroundings, only to notice the crickets had stopped chirping. I got a bit freaked out because I knew for sure they were chirping when I first got out. I was somewhat scared to move, but I did anyway, almost running to get inside as soon as possible. When I returned, I went to my girlfriend, who was already in the living room, laying down on the couch with a blanket on top. She noticed I was a bit agitated and asked me what was wrong. "Your patio is scary," I jokingly said, not wanting to tell her what I felt because she hates anything that has to do with horror or scary stuff. I decided to brush it off, so I ran around the couch and sat at the other end of it, putting my girlfriend's legs on my lap, asking what she was watching on the TV. I turned to my right and noticed there was a huge window on one side of the wall that gave me a perfect view of the patio. I didn't see it before because it was next to a cabinet, being covered on the way into the living room. Now that I knew about it, I kept turning to see outside, still thinking how scary it looked. As we were watching a boring documentary, I took off my girlfriend's socks and started to rub her feet below the blanket. After all, it was a chilly night, and her feet were cold. We didn't have any conversation. I was getting sleepy, but after around 20 minutes, I started hearing noises outside, noises that seemed to be coming from the patio. I grabbed the controller and muted the TV, just to make sure I was hearing right, and I was. It sounded like tiny twigs breaking and grass being brushed. I quickly turned to my right to see outside the window, but I could only see the plants and part of the trunk from a big tree. The noise, although faint, stopped for a few seconds, resumed a few moments later, and stopped again. I stood frozen, watching outside the window, almost as if waiting for a thing to appear. "What is that noise?" I whispered to my girlfriend. But after I did not get a reply, I turned around and stood up a little to see if she had her eyes closed and had fallen asleep. I was a bit freaked out, but I chose to believe it was probably a coyote or some other animal that lurks around in the woods at night. I kept watching the TV muted, waiting for the noise to start again, but after a while, I realized it had stopped. I turned around one more time to see outside the window, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. The first thing I noticed when I looked outside that time was a faint image of a gray, pale, and tall humanoid figure peeking from one side of the big tree trunk, staring right back at me. I suddenly froze in fear, not wanting to even slightly move or breathe. I watched this thing as it watched me, even though I couldn't see its eyes because of the poor lighting. But I knew it was watching me. I knew it was aware of me. I somehow felt it. The creature was, like I said, pale, really pale. I could see the contrast between its skin and the bark of the tree. The creature was very thin, had skinny shoulders and torso, as well as an elongated neck. It looked like it was around 6 or 7 feet tall. Unfortunately, or should I say fortunately, I cannot distinguish in detail any facial features just because of how dark it was. But I could perfectly picture in my head the shadowy areas around where eyes would be for a person, and another one where the mouth would be. It was sort of grinning. At this point, I was trembling a little, and I wanted to let my girlfriend know what I was witnessing, but I didn't want to move a muscle or break eye contact with this thing. I felt like I needed to remain still or play dead to lose its attention. But no, the creature kept staring at me, not moving an inch, like it was trying to do the same. Then, to turn things worse, the creature started to make an echoey clicking noise, kind of like a frog but slower, and I noticed it begin to turn its head to left side and turn back to look at me really fast. I don't know what to think anymore. All I wanted was my girlfriend to wake up, to prove to me that this thing was real. I began whispering her name in between my teeth and mouth, not even wanting to move my jaw, but she wouldn't wake up. The thing kept doing the same, turning its head to the left and back to me really fast. The creature crouched, kind of like when big predator cats are hunting and lay low, preparing to attack. I whispered. I know, stupid. I didn't even think through the fact that if I woke my girlfriend up, she would start moving, and the thing would notice both of us. But I was so scared that I kept trying. This went around for maybe less than 15 minutes, before I realized I still had my girlfriend's foot in my hand below the blanket, so the thing would not be able to see me moving. Only using my wrist, I slightly pulled her foot back and forth, whispering her name again and again, but no response. Then, I stood in shock when I saw the creature stand up again and started walking backwards, still looking at me and disappearing into the darkness of the patio, doing the clicking sounds again. I passed saliva and blinked a few times, realizing my eyes twitched and itched from staring at the creature the whole time. For some reason, I couldn't turn my head around. I kept looking in the direction where the creature disappeared, listening for sounds and waiting for it to appear once again. A few minutes passed, and I took the chance to turn around. Slowly, as if in slow motion, I turned my head to my girlfriend and started calling her name louder while pushing her leg and quickly scribbling my fingers on the sole of her foot to wake her up fast. Her foot jerked and she started turning. I stood up to her shoulders and patted her, whispering, "Hey, wake up!" She opened her eyes and squinted at me, adjusting to the light of the TV, wondering why I woke her up. I kept telling her to remain still and silent when I heard the sound again. She looked at me, noticed the concern in my eyes, and asked, "What's wrong?" "Shh, be quiet," I followed, putting 2 fingers on her lips and looking into her eyes. I could see she was getting freaked out. I don't blame her. I would be too if someone woke me up, looking scared and telling me to be quiet. The clicking sound went off again, but it was louder this time. almost as if that thing was on the other side of the window. This time, both of us heard the noise and more scared. "What is that?" my girlfriend asked, but I remained quiet. Again, in slow motion, I started to turn my head to the window to check, and there it was. The thing was right outside the window, only a couple feet away and staring right back at me. This time, I had a clearer vision of how it looked, and I was wrong. I was petrified in fear when I noticed it didn't have a mouth where a person would have it. Instead, the mouth was on its neck, which opened horizontally, not vertically. As it opened its mouth, it vibrated with the clicking sounds, and hundreds of small razor-like teeth shined with the window glare. It had oval-shaped eyes that were as dark as the night. I felt its gaze pierce through my soul. I started shaking and breathing faster, not believing what I was seeing. My girlfriend peeked by my side to see what I was looking at, and I instantly felt her body tense up under me as she started to ask me in a trembling voice, what was that thing? But no answer came out of me. Now, we were both scared to even move a muscle. After the humanoid noticed my girlfriend move, it gave a step forward and lowered its head, almost as if it was scanning us. We jumped in fear after seeing the thing doing it, because we thought it would start coming toward us. My heart was beating so fast that I thought I would faint any time. Then, the thing began to walk slowly to its right side, in the direction where the door to the corridor was, resuming the clicking sounds. If you have seen the movie Signs, and remember the scene where the humanoid came out of the bushes outside the house, that would be an accurate representation of what we saw. We took a good look at every inch of that thing's body. It walked with its head turned to us. After we lost sight of it through the window, we both sat up and looked at each other, when suddenly, we heard something scratch the metal door that led to the corridor, as if the thing was grazing its fingers on it. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my girlfriend's wrist and jolted out of the living room, locking ourselves in her bedroom. We sat on the floor right next to the bedroom, hiding in case that thing got inside. The scratching sounds continued, and my girlfriend started to sob, still asking about what we saw. I felt powerless, knowing I couldn't do much to reassure her. I could only hold her and hope for the thing to give up and leave. The noise continued for about 3 minutes, when it suddenly stopped. Then, we began hearing stepping noises all around the house, and we kept turning to whatever direction we heard the noise come from. Eventually, the noises ceased, and after an hour or so, we figured the creature had left. My girlfriend, still with tears in her eyes, told me if we can lay in bed. I agreed because my back was hurting from being in that crouched position for over an hour. We slowly crawled into bed, making the least noise possible and covering ourselves with another blanket. "Don't worry, everything is going to be okay tomorrow. Try to sleep," I told her as I tightened my grip on her. She didn't reply, but after a while, she fell asleep again. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. I kept my eyes open, listening to every sound around us. The next day, we didn't even want to touch the subject. All we said was that creature was not from this world. My girlfriend said she felt the creature's gaze pierce into her, almost as if that thing was feeling with its pure sight. Nothing else was said. We were left sort of traumatized. I realized that she was going to have to put up with that fear of going outside in the future, and I didn't want that thing anywhere near her again, or her family. Days after the encounter, we both suffered from nightmares. She mentioned that sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and trembling, and wouldn't be able to stop until her mom went to check on her. The fences that separated the patio and woods have been redone since. They now stand at 2 meters tall, blocking any easy access from the woods. Before this, they had to make sure they didn't have to go outside at night. They have not had any encounters since, but my girlfriend insists that the patio gives her the chills at night. I keep wondering what that thing was, that humanoid creature, some kind of alien. This story might be too fantastic to believe, but I promise it happened. It was the last 3 months of '99, and my first marriage had just ended. When we began discussions, I agreed to let my ex continue to live in our house with the children. As a result, we thrust onto the market for a new home. For the time being, I was crashing in an extended stay hotel and living on fast food. Finally, as that spring approached, I found a place that I loved. The only disappointing part of the deal was that it had to have been uninhabited for going on 7 years. The woman that had lived there before had died, and her heirs had let it sit empty. It was eventually agreed to put it on the market, and that's when I came upon it. Despite the probable long list of repairs, the price was just too good to pass up. The morning of March 3rd, I picked up the keys and signed the papers. The house was officially mine, and I got to work immediately to make it livable. I replaced a broken window and a few other things before I moved in 2 weeks later. I hadn't been there 2 days before I received a visit from a pair of detectives. They sat me down and told me the craziest thing I'd heard in my life. According to them, the nice little old lady who had lived there, Sharon, had a very abusive husband named Walter. She claimed Walter left for the store one morning and never returned. Because of his history of abuse, she didn't report his disappearance. The couple's only child, Melinda, did not either. Her mother had told Walter that he had been having an affair with a woman from his job and had likely ran away to be with her. Melinda took her mother's story at face value, and the woman bid Walter good riddance and moved on with their lives. Within the year, Sharon, now a free woman, began a relationship with her neighbor, Joseph Poole. She was granted a divorce, and the couple were married not long after. The pair lived out their lives in this house. Not everyone was so eager to believe Sharon's story, and the police were asked by Walter's sister to investigate his disappearance. Year after year, the trail always led back to Sharon, but the detectives on the case never had enough proof to arrest her. Then, about 15 years after he went missing, a new pair of detectives were put on the trail. They went back to Walter's sister, now a very old woman, and asked if she had any idea how Sharon could have disposed of her brother's body. For the first time since the case began, she recalled an incident that took place not long after Walter's disappearance. She was visiting Sharon, hoping to get some information as to where her brother had moved to, and she happened to notice a large patch of the backyard where the ground had been tilled up and roses had been planted. This struck her as odd because it was still in the middle of winter and at least 4 months before planting season began. I'm sure you know where this is going. The bushes would surely die in the brutal Michigan winter. She asked Sharon about this, and she simply said that she wanted to get ahead of things. The sister had no reason to disbelieve her at the time and accepted the story. For the first time in a long time, the police actually had a direction to follow. However, they were frustrated by the judge's denial of a search warrant, and the case soon ran out of steam, as it had so many times before. Life would then proceed, and over the years, the case would be forgotten. That was until a new police chief was hired, and he launched an initiative to clear the city's open cases. My visitors were assigned the case, and after a little research, they discovered Sharon and her new husband had died, and the house had a new owner. The reason for their visit was to ask if I would allow them to dig up the yard to look for Walter's remains. I was naturally shocked by all of it, and I needed time to think about it. After taking a few days to consider the request, I gave them the okay. The following morning, 20 or so cops, accompanied by a backhoe, began their search. I want to say I was surprised by what they found, but after hearing their story, Walter's skeleton being discovered was almost expected. At the end of the day, everything seemed to work out for the best. The cops managed to close a 50-year-old mystery, and Walter got to be put away alongside his loved ones. The only downside was Walter's sister didn't live to see it. She deserved to be there for the funeral after all the time she put into the search for him. This situation has made me do a lot more thinking since it was brought to my attention. From all reports, old Walter was not good to his wife, or the respected marriage. Maybe Sharon had a good reason to put an end to his crap. The problem I have with what she did is that by killing Walter and hiding his body away in the garden, his innocent sister, who had hurt nobody, was left with the terrible notion that she and the rest of his family had been abandoned by him for a young piece of tail. Then, as time carried on, she had come to terms with the strong possibility that her brother was indeed dead. She had nowhere to go to mourn him, and that, my friends, is just not right. I was on my postal route one morning when I got the idea. A small part of my route cuts through this old, abandoned neighborhood. At the end of a cul-de-sac sits this decrepit 2-story house, something like you'd see in an old horror movie. This is where I was going to do it. You see, I had this friend, Philip. We are part of a ghost hunting group in our spare time. It's a pastime I really enjoy and derive a lot of excitement from. Philip, however, is terrified of anything supernatural. Something as average as a cheesy ghost video on YouTube scares the crap out of him. I'll never understand why he puts himself through one of our investigations. I asked him once why he did it, and he said it was his way to face his fears, something he'd heard about on TV. This put the kernel of an idea in my head. When I saw the house, it grew into a full-blown plan. I was going to pull a joke on Philip. When it was over, hopefully his fear of spooky things would be defeated. Anytime I can get a good laugh and help a friend at the same time seemed like a win-win to me. I called him up at the afternoon and told him we had a new house to investigate that Friday night. He sounded excited, and I couldn't help but laugh, knowing just what I had in mind for him. I had 2 days to get what I needed and set everything up. I'd stop in during my route and look for the best places to rig my equipment. There were signs of people, but from all I could see, they had not been around for a long time. Finally, Friday night came. After work, I parked my car a few streets over and walked over to the house. I wasn't expecting Phil for another hour. I took this time to complete any last-minute tasks. I got done with 15 minutes to spare and crawled into my hiding place. Within minutes, I heard footsteps approaching outside. I bit my lip to stifle my giggling. I'd never felt so much like a child at that moment. Mere seconds after I heard the footsteps, my phone vibrated with a text message. It was Philip. He said he was held up by a train near his apartment and was running late. This was bad news. Phil lived almost 30 minutes away. I'd have to lay crunched up in my hidey hole even longer. The steps entered the house, echoing down the massive hallway. Wait a minute. This is when it hit me. If Philip was a half hour away, who was here? Voices of at least 2 men came bouncing down the hall toward me. One man had noticed my equipment and sounded very angry. I heard loud bangs a few seconds later, from what I can assume was my stuff being smashed. The second man had a slight slur to his voice, and his words were far more aggressive. If I find out who did this crap, I'm gonna cut his head off and put it on a pole outside. Maybe that will keep people out. My heart began beating like it was trying to break loose from my body. I wasn't sure what they were capable of, and hoped they would leave without realizing that I was still there. I did my best to not make any noise. I continued to listen, and then I heard something dreaded. One of the men, the drunk one, found my bag. I had stuck it in a hole under the stairs to hide it. Even then, I wasn't sure they knew I was still there, at least until the other man began calling for me to come out. He said if I made them look, they were going to make me sorry when they found me. All doubt was removed from that statement. I could hear them going from room to room, opening closets and doors. They were a few rooms away, and I decided I need to get the hell out of there, that second. When I heard them enter the room next to me, I made a break for it. I didn't dare look back, and within seconds, I could hear footfalls behind me. So I pushed myself even harder. It seemed to work. The closer I got to my car, the footfalls seemed to grow quieter. Still, even then, I didn't dare slow down. I ran around to the driver's side of my car and unlocked the door as fast as I could. This was my first look at my 2 pursuers. I was pleased to see them almost 100 yards behind me. They were gasping and fighting for every breath. I wasn't taking any chances though. I started my car and tore out of there without looking back ever again. That is when I remembered Philip was on his way. I made up some quick BS text and sent it to him. I did so just in time. I was 4 or 5 blocks from the house when we met each other across the intersection. He pulled up to me, and I began spitting some yarn about a wrong address. He must have believed it. He shrugged his shoulders, turned around, and headed for home. I followed him for about a mile just to make sure they turned off from my own place. To my knowledge, Philip still has no idea how close he was to being assaulted by an angry pair of squatters. The same likely applies to the practical joke I was planning. After my run-in with them, things got put into perspective. I realized the joke was a childish thing to do in the first place. I've put stupid stuff like that behind me now. I'm in no position to tell folks how to live their lives. If he wants to live in fear, that's his choice. God knows there's plenty of things out there to be afraid of. I've been hearing a lot of knocking in the woods, close behind my house. It's very loud and has a repeated pattering like as follows. 1 loud solid hit, 3 quick taps, then another loud solid hit. Both my father and I have heard this as we were just walking outside. The scary incidents have happened to me 3 different nights in the weeks prior. Tonight was the most scary as I had had at least 3 around my house. I've been knocking back and whistling to no avail, but sitting out on the back patio, I can hear the walking, limbs being broken as it walks. Then, everything is quiet, as if they have reached the edge of the wood line and are watching me. A few times I've sought to entertain them. I do silly stuff or whistle a tune. The night before, I was met with 3 limbs being cracked within 30 minutes. This was too frequent to be natural. I have tried to get a trail cam video, but no luck. The nights when I'm by myself, I can go out as per usual. They're already there and waiting on me. Tonight, I tried something different. I decided to just casually sit facing the woods and talk to them. I just say that I was their friend, and I meant no harm. As I talked, the woods lit up with noise. I was being approached from 3 different directions, but the largest one concerned me. I could hear limbs breaking as it got closer. I had a flashlight but was reluctant to shine it until I was freaked out. The thing was too close. I lit it up. What I could see appeared to be a very large animal, not quite to the edge, and colors making it almost indistinguishable from the woods. But the eyes, oh man, they shined a bright green. I would have thought it to be a critter, that only they were spaced 5 inches apart, and I could clearly make out the outline of something squatting, just staring right at me, not even blinking. This thing was huge. It nearly made me run just seeing it. I turned the light off and went the hell inside. I checked again an hour later and could still hear it walking around out there. This is something that has happened to me numerous times, and every time I'm alone, I can get a response from them. But if I have somebody with me and they do not show, they are definitely Bigfoots in Adele. And I have some that come to my backyard. There's only been 1 incident of the house being smacked during the night, and I've noticed that every night as they approach, all the neighborhood dogs go crazy. They can probably smell them. Now that I've seen them and know what to look for, I see and hear their presence all the time. This is definitely a hotbed. I just don't have the technology to show you definitive proof. At the time I first encountered them, I was shocked to find the eye shine coming from ground level. It was bad weather that night, and poor visibility. I thought it was a small animal, but decided to video it anyway, because I was seeing a face. When I walked closer, I could tell it was a Bigfoot lying flat on the ground, watching me through the shrubs. I still have that video. The environment around me is a small creek running next to my house. Several acres of forest behind the house. It's part pine forest. There's a large pond way back there off of our property, and as it gets closer to my house, it turns into thick spots of oak, pine, and several types of small foliage. There's a very dense deer population in this specific location also. Each time I've had the Bigfoot approach the house, they are coming in on one of two trails which we have leading out into the woods. They're coming from far back near where the pond is, I imagine. This is something that happened a long time ago, and to be honest, I never thought it could be connected to a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But recently, I've been reading a lot about the topic, and I figured I'd send it to you guys after finding your website and just checking out reports from areas where I've lived in the past. Anyway, I found a report from Belchertown, Massachusetts, and I lived in a rural part for several years when I was in college. This was sometime around 1997 to 1998. My housemates and I were out on our porch, which faced 2 to 3 acres of meadow. This open meadow and the porch were on the east side of the house. The entire area past the meadow to the east was wooded with houses and cabins, here and there, for about a mile, until you hit a lake. Behind the house was about 10 to 20 yards of woods, with a walking trail, and then another 10 yards past was train tracks running east to west, then more woods. Anyway, my housemates and I were out on the porch when we heard the sound of a tree crashing to the ground. About 19 seconds later, while we were all kind of shocked, there was an enormously loud and guttural growl, scream, roar, whatever you want to call it. In all my life, I have never heard any animal sound that could match its intensity, volume. It just sounded plain angry and vivacious. It is hard to describe just how loud it was and how stunned we all were that this was coming from an animal just inside the tree line. There were coyotes, owls, foxes galore back then, and the sounds they made were a world away in comparison. We all immediately looked at each other, got up, and went into the house as fast as we could, without muttering a word. Everyone assumed it was an animal, but after reading about and hearing recordings of presumed Sasquatch screams and howls, it brought the memory rushing back, because it is so similar to what we heard. Anyway, just wanted to share this with you. In the years of 2015 to 2016, I had encounters with a creature in the Mississippi River bottoms at a place called Drinkwater, a flood-control pump station on the Mississippi levee system east of Charleston, Missouri. The first encounter consisted of hearing high-pitched, long drawn-out echoing of the concrete walls of the pump station. The sounds were far from off, so I paid them no mind at the time, but I did find them to be quite odd. The second encounter happened just a few months later, as a few friends and I were bow fishing one night. We were down by the lock gate, shooting fish, when I happened to look up at the levee to our right, and noticed something standing on the levee watching us about 200 or so yards off. Even though it was dark, you could see the outline of the figure standing upright in the faint light, caused by a semi-truck weight station on the highway that crossed over to Illinois. It didn't stay long, but it left an eerie feeling over us at the time. We left shortly afterwards. The third encounter was the most interesting one of all. One of my friends and I were bow fishing again, and one night at the pump station, when we began hearing the high-pitched sounds again. My friend, who was holding up a spotlight so that I could see to shoot, began to go into a panic and started shining the light in the woods to our right, which irritated me at this time, because I couldn't see the fish without the light. While trying to calm him down to get the light back to the water, something grunted off to our left. At 25 yards or so stood a creature of a height between 8 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown to black hair at the very edge of the tree line, in full view of the spotlight. The creature watched us for a little under a minute time, with one arm gripping a tree limb the size of my forearm, as if he were using it to keep his balance. When the creature departed, he let out several loud grunts and at a steady walking pace left the scene while breaking any tree limb in its path, whether it was dead or green. We left after the encounter, terrified at what we had just witnessed. The past several months, we have had some very strange activity going on around our house. We live out in the country, and we've ignored a lot of it. But here lately, we can't ignore the activity going on. About a month or two ago, my husband went outside to smoke, and he heard something as he looked into our driveway. and we seen an animal that stood about 7 feet tall, all hairy. He couldn't explain it, except that it looked like one of our dogs on 2 feet and extremely tall. It walked past our trailer, and that's how he could guess the height. We've heard what sounded like a baseball bat hitting a tree. We've heard whistles and calls of what a Bigfoot sounds like. We've had chickens and cats go missing. Every night, about the same time, you can hear footsteps and sounds. It's to the point where we were so scared to go outside. We've never believed in Bigfoot till we've seen it and have heard them. I'm sure there are more than one around here, because we live near caves and they sound like they are all around us at the nighttime. We had a ball in our yard, and after finding it in the woods one day and down the road from us another day and brought it back several times, it went missing and we've not been able to find it. I just find it odd that this has just happened just after we've been hearing the noises that sound like a Bigfoot. I worked on a dairy farm between Deersville and Tippecanoe, Ohio, and Harrison County during high school. It was March 1982, about 5 o'clock in the morning. There was a heavy frost on the ground, a full moon, and I could see fairly clearly due to the moonlight. I went to the outside paddock area to feed the replacement dairy heifer and started dumping the grain attached to the board fence when I heard a low grunt. The kind of grunt that someone makes from being in one position too long as you stand up. When I looked up, this figure was in the process of standing up. It was on the other side of a small creek that ran through the paddock, approximately 50 yards away. The figure was standing next to the wooden hay feeder. It stood there for a few seconds and then walked towards the other end of the pen, closest to the woods. I only saw it for about 5 to 10 seconds, but could hear it walking for approximately 45 seconds. I heard the sounds of footsteps crunching in the frost as it moved to the other end of the pen, and then heard the squeaking sound of the fence being pushed down. The cattle, somehow, were not spooked at all during this encounter and just continued to eat. After we were finished milking, I went over to the hay feeder and couldn't find any prints in the ground as the frost was gone. The figure appeared to be 7 feet tall, which I estimated was a foot taller than I. I have hunted and farmed the area for years. My parents' farm is approximately 5 miles from where my incident took place. I have 2 other possible incidents, all while bow hunting. The first occurred while I was hunting from a tree stand in a hayfield back in 2010. It was the end of October, or first part of November, and it was right at dusk. I watched 3 does enter the hayfield and start to eat the grass. After approximately 2 to 3 minutes, I heard a scream that I can't explain. The 3 does immediately ran off through the hayfield and into the woods. While still in my tree stand, whatever it was that kept screaming for 15 minutes, it caused me to leave the area. The second incident was in 2011, during bow season, while hunting the same place with my teenage son. While using a doe call, I heard something walk down over the hill through the trees. I watched and listened for a few minutes and can hear the sound of something urinating. Whatever it was did not move again. When it was too dark to hunt, we left the area.